And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live here Tuesday, July 18th. Joining us right now, our buddy Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army and JAG Corps. You see him on MSNBC, NBC, also YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, and a podcast. I still think you have the podcast, right? You have the podcast?
I still have the podcast, Dean.
Everything. And he's got merchandise for sale on the YouTube channel. Get your Glenn Kirschner mask, glasses, headset, the whole thing. So, Glenn, what a big day. So Donald Trump post this morning, deranged Jack Smith, the prosecutor of Joe Biden's DOJ, sent a letter again. It was Sunday night stating that I'm a target, the January 6th grand jury investigation, and giving me a very short days to report to the grand jury, which almost always means an arrest and indictment. Just so much fun in that statement. So what is a target letter? Tell us first, you're a former federal prosecutor. When do you send target letters?
Yeah, and the one thing Donald Trump is right about is that he is almost certainly going to be indicted now.
Right.
So we send target letters. We don't do it in all criminal cases or even in most criminal cases. But when we've been in the grand jury for a long time in an overt capacity, in other words, everybody knows we've been running this investigation. The witnesses know, the target of the investigation knows. Now, we do a lot of covert investigating because often we don't want people to know we're investigating in the grand jury. But listen, the cat's been out of the bag for a very long time here. So if at the end of the investigation, we are determined to indict one or more targets, we will sometimes send them a target letter. And it simply says, you now have the opportunity to come before the grand jury, present your side of the story, testify truthfully, and hey, maybe this whole thing was some big misunderstanding. Maybe you really didn't do anything wrong. But the target of the investigation gets that opportunity to persuade the grand jury that he or she committed no crime. I think it's important for people to know that target is specifically defined in the U.S. Attorney's Manual, that is the procedural Bible by which prosecutors operate. And it's a two-part test. Somebody is a target if prosecutors have substantial evidence linking them to the commission of one or more crimes, and two, prosecutors view them as a putative defendant. In other words, it's somebody the prosecutors are intending to indict. Donald Trump is a target. Donald Trump has a few days to decide whether he will appear before the grand jury. Of course, we know he won't because he has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And then he will find himself, the marquee defendant on a big old federal indictment in the District of Columbia, United States of America, versus Donald Trump and perhaps a cast of thousands, maybe, maybe not.
So in the typical case you had, I know this is anything but a typical case, but in a typical case, would you send a target letter near the end of your investigation where you're getting ready to charge?
At the absolute end, because occasionally, Dean, I've had targets take me up on that invitation, and they've come in for instance, we had a case where two security guards at a hospital killed the patient, and they used, a manner of restraint that they weren't authorized to use. And so we invited them in. We said, listen, we believe there's criminal liability here, but we invite you in. And one of the two actually came in and testified and tried to explain why he did what he did. I don't want to say talked his way out of it, because some of these cases are far more nuanced than the January 6th insurrection case when it comes to criminal liability of the target. But so sometimes we send them, sometimes we don't, but rarely does the defendant decide to go in the grand jury and try to talk his way out of it.
So this is near the end. So
the dead end, because before we ever talk to the defendant, we want to have exhausted every other investigative lead. That is when we decide at the very end to invite the defendant in.
Any sense, I know it's speculative, but since this is near the end and they're giving him 4 days to show up, he's not going to show up. CNN reported that his aides already said he's not going to show up. When do you think they go next? Is the next step going to the grand jury? In any sense when that could happen? I mean, not the exact day, but in the next few weeks, is it likely to see charges? The next month to see charges?
So I think one instructive data point is how this played out in the classified documents, obstruction of justice, and espionage case. I think he was issued a target letter, and then within 2 or 3 weeks, the grand jury returned indictments against he and Walt Nauta. So I think that gives us some idea of how long we might have to wait before the issuance of this target letter and when we might expect to see indictments. That 4-day window that he gave. Now, I think the only one who said 4 days is Donald Trump. And whereas reporting has confirmed there was a target letter, we don't know that the 4 days was accurate, but let's assume it was. That feels like a very short fuse deadline, which suggests we could see indictment within a matter of a week or two.
Kind of remarkable. I'm chatting with Glenn Kirschner. I'm trying to conceal my giddiness because I never call for Trump to be charged in New York. I never demanded he be charged for the classified documents. I have always demanded and counted out on Twitter and now on Threads for 2 years how many days we are from January 6th, because this is about the protecting our democratic republic, something you and I have talked about. That's what this is about. Because how could Joe Biden say on the debate stage, my opponent attempted a coup and incited insurrection? And he'll be like, well, no one ever charged me, so I guess not. Now that's going to end it. In your heart, what do you think the charges will be? Obviously, the January 6th committee referred 4 charges. Judge David Carter referred a few charges as well. Do you think that's likely in the potential of charges?
Yeah, I think we're certainly going to see, or extremely likely to see, obstructing an official proceeding, the certification of the election's results. I think we are very likely to see a conspiracy charge. What we've discussed before is a 371 conspiracy, 18 United States Code section 3771, which is a very broad, sweeping conspiracy charge that says if you committed any offenses against the United States, or you committed any crimes intended to defraud the United States, including out of a free and fair election, you can be charged under that statute. So I think we're going to see those charges. And then the question becomes, what other substantive offenses does Jack Smith want to put up under that umbrella conspiracy charge? I think there are any number of crimes for pressuring a federal government official to violate the law. That would be the pressure campaign against President and Vice President Mike Pence. I think there is clearly inciting a riot and inciting an insurrection.
You think he'll be charged for that?
Absolutely.
Interesting. I was
absolutely. Congress investigated it. They specifically referred it for prosecution. The evidence is there, and I expect him to be charged with insurrection. Importantly, Dean, insurrection is one of the few charges that carries with it the authorized penalty under the federal statute for insurrection of disqualification from serving in office. The Constitution, the 14th Amendment provides it, but there's no implementing mechanism in the 14th Amendment, but there is in the federal law. So I think that's a critically important charge, and I think Jack Smith will bring it. And then there's the whole fake electors scheme. I think an interesting tactical question is, do you try to bring all of the crimes that were committed as part and parcel of the fake elector scheme, all designed to defeat Joe Biden's election win? Do you bring them up underneath the same 371 conspiracy, or do you perhaps put those in a separate conspiracy indictment? These are exciting tactical prosecutorial decisions that I swear I wish I was still on the inside with that team working to make the best decisions for the American people, but I'm on the outside running my mouth now.
No, you're making us all smarter. So the other conspiracy, because the January 6th committee refers specifically to the conspiracy to defraud the United States of America, and that was the charge they said for the fraudulent elector scheme. Is that the likely charge we would see? That's the conspiracy, its own felony, which is a very serious felony. People think conspiracy. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it could be its own conspiracy, the fake elector scheme. It could be separate and apart from obstructing the official proceedings and the insurrection and pressuring government officials and all that. You know, only Jack Smith knows what the right tactical approach is. Ordinarily, when it comes to these big investigations, Dean, we go big or go home. Why? We want to put all charges that properly can be brought in one indictment. It's called joinder of charges in one indictment. Why? Because that gives the jury the power of context. They could see all of the wrongdoing presented in one case, as opposed to when you start doing separate indictments, then the battle becomes, okay, you can only introduce evidence with respect to these charges, and you're depriving the jury of the power of context, the overarching picture. But, you have to reach a conclusion that the law permits you to join these charges. And here's what I can predict. The more charges and the more defendants that are joined in one indictment, every single defendant will file what's called a motion to sever and will say, wait. My case or my charges are not properly brought in this conspiracy indictment. You need to sever me out and give me a separate trial. Every defendant, Dean, ultimately will file a motion attempting to sever himself out of the case.
And I'm chatting with Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, of all the January 6th defendants who have had trials in DC, can you think of anyone who was not convicted?
Yeah, I think there was a bench trial where a judge acquitted somebody recently. But if you look at the numbers, something like 700-800 prosecutions have progressed to the point of, verdict. And I think it is but a handful, 1, 2, 3, that have suffered any full acquittal. So, I would ask the question, are prosecutors being a little bit too discerning with respect to the cases they're bringing? Because I don't want to see prosecutors who are only willing to bring what they believe are sure things, because I don't think that really serves the victims and the American people.
And this case would be venued in DC.
It would.
As opposed to the Florida case. So let's go to the other Donald Trump trial, criminal action that's going on. Because this guy, in a month from now, Glenn, he could be charged in 4 different jurisdictions, which should be a prize. You should get something, because who would expect that? Like a new car or free pizza, something. Here's another one we've got in Florida right now, which I call the espionage case. The media likes to call classified documents, but it's the espionage case. In that one, Judge Aileen Cannon, who he appointed, who already was way too nice to him with the special master case. Now Trump is on TV sucking up to her. He was on Fox News on Sunday saying she's highly respected, very smart, very strong judge, very smart. He kept saying she loves our country. I'm like, what is your reaction to that? And is there any point where a judge should go like, I shouldn't be on this case?
Yeah, I did a whole Justice Matters video on that exact topic last night, Dean. And, Donald Trump is nothing if not sort of pathetically transparent and consistent, because all of the judges who presided over his cases fairly and impartially. Judge Kaplan up in New York, the E. Jean Carroll case, Judge Juan Merchan, also state court in New York over both the Trump Organization case, and Trump Org was criminally convicted, and now he is the presiding judge over the future prosecution of Donald Trump being conducted by Alvin Bragg. I went back and I pulled up everything Donald Trump said about those judges. They are Trump haters, horrible people. This should never be allowed to happen. And yesterday or Sunday, he goes on Fox News and he's like, oh, Judge Cannon, she's the best of the best. She's so smart and so strong and so brave and so loves our country. He is flattering her, and he hopes flattery will get him everywhere. And what he is demanding in his legal filings is that Judge Cannon set no trial date, which would actually violate the Speedy Trial Act, which says when somebody is charged, the judge shall set a date certain for the commencement of the trial. Jack Smith's team has consistently said, we are asking for a December trial date, December 2023. And Trump thinks he can flatter his way into Judge Aileen Cannon setting no trial date. Now, it is up to the discretion of Judge Cannon, and we know she has once before abused her judicial discretion and did Donald Trump an enormous favor that he wasn't entitled to. That's not my assessment. That's the assessment of a 3-judge, Republican-appointed judges appellate court, the 11th Circuit. They said she abused her discretion and, quote, interfered in an ongoing criminal investigation. So we will see, perhaps later today, whether flattery will get Donald Trump everywhere and everything he wants or not.
If Trump is charged by DOJ in DC by that grand jury, in your mind, does it matter the order of these charges? And say Fulton County ends up being in the early part of August, which we might get charges there. Or will it just be, I guess in New York, state court's a little slower. I would imagine the federal courts are going to go quicker. So it doesn't matter to you if in the order of their prosecution.
It doesn't matter. There is no rule that says, first in, first out, first indictment, first trial. That's not the way it works. I would say, practically speaking, that's generally how we see it play out. But in the documents trial, which I call the documents obstruction of justice and espionage trial, most accurately, because he's charged for all three categories of those crimes, there are the CIPA procedures that have to be gone through, Classified Information Protection Act. There are security clearances that have to be obtained for Donald Trump's lawyers. So there are lots of sort of legitimate and appropriate stumbling blocks or hurdles to overcome in that case that could set the trial off, you know, a little bit farther than an ordinary criminal trial would be set off. So for all we know, the case in DC, once indicted, could end up going to trial first. The case in Georgia, once indicted, could end up going to trial first. Maybe even New York, although, as you say, they tend to allow lots and lots and lots of pre-trial litigation on issues that other jurisdictions don't. So that may take some time. Here's what's going to happen, though. All of the judges, I believe, and all of the parties are going to have to coordinate in good faith, yes, even Donald Trump's lawyers, and talk about the competing scheduling concerns that are presented in each one of these cases. And together there will be a decision made. Okay, here's the order of Donald Trump's trials. 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, and he's going to be convicted 4 times over.
Have you ever had a case where a defendant was charged in 4 different jurisdictions, federal and state, in case you've had?
I've had defendants charged in multiple jurisdictions, most frequently in my practice, because I practiced in DC. I might have a defendant who was also charged in Maryland and in Virginia. And then you bet I coordinated early and often with the prosecutors and law enforcement agencies in those surrounding jurisdictions. And together we tried to make the best decision to do a couple of things. 1, hold the defendant accountable, and 2, sort of protect the community in the process. Those were our goals and our motivators. But yeah, I mean, you have to kind of set your ego aside. It's not like, hey, I indicted first, so I get to go to trial first. No, we all have a responsibility to the people, you know, that we represent in our capacity as prosecutors.
I'm chatting with Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, you touched on something else, the idea of keeping the community safe. There was an article, and I thought of you, it was in the Washington Post 2 weeks ago. I believe it deserved more attention. And Christopher Wray testified last week, the FBI director, that a special unit's been created in the FBI because of threats made against prosecutors, DOJ, and their family, and FBI agents who are investigating Donald Trump. And I'll read from the Washington Post article. It said, prosecutors involved in the classified document case against former President Donald Trump are facing substantial harassment and threats online and elsewhere. And it continues here. Far-right Trump supporters are posting the names of prosecutors and government workers online, yelling at them in demonstrations, threatening them, and sometimes revealing details about their personal lives. How concerned that a cornered Donald Trump, whose only chance at all to stay out of prison is winning, and November 2024 gets even more dangerous and becomes a threat to the community and openly starts almost calling for violence or just on the edge of it?
Well, you know, that's why Donald Trump should be ordered detained pending trial. And I say that, you know, not from my own personal preference or any animosity I have toward the man. I say it because the law provides that when there's clear and convincing evidence that a defendant pending trial presents a danger to the community, he's supposed to be detained or she's supposed to be detained pending trial. That's the law. Everyone has ignored that when it comes to Donald Trump. And we do it at our peril. We as a system, as institutions of government, do it at our peril. What did we see Donald Trump do recently? He posted President Obama's home address. One of his followers, a guy named Taylor Taranto, read it, reposted it on his social media platform, and then armed himself with 2 guns, 400 rounds of ammunition, a machete, and headed toward President Obama's home. Fortunately, he was intercepted before he could get there. And he is now what? Detained pending trial, Dean, the way the system is supposed to operate. Let me use another example. Jack Teixeira, the 21-year-old National Guardsman who compromised classified materials and national defense information. He's detained pending trial, and his attorneys just argued in court that this system is unfair because Donald Trump is not detained pending trial, and my client is, and Donald Trump is a greater danger to the community. I can't dispute that as a matter of fact. Now, Jack Teixeira should be detained, but so should Donald Trump, because we are allowing his, daily threats and his daily, attempts to inspire his base to get after his enemies. Those would be prosecutors, judges, witnesses, grand jurors. It goes unaddressed, and that damages us all. So maybe when he gets indicted for the insurrection, Jack Smith will move for his detention pending trial because the evidence is there to support that request.
Obviously, I mean, the insurrections only happened because of Donald Trump. The attack on January 6th, as the January 6th committee put in their report, the central cause of January 6th was one person, Donald J. Trump. That's the truth. Without Trump, there's no attack. If he just accepted his loss, there's no attack. There's not even debating that. He just said, I lost. It sucks. No one's showing up on January 6th. No one knew the certification date of the Electoral Count Act of 1880 something. It wasn't like his supporters like, well, that Electoral Count Act of 1888 gives us an opportunity here. That wasn't happening. They're like, Trump's like, be there, be wild, January 6th. And they went there. So the last thing here, because it's like, folks, you're going to be able to sit for the bar in various jurisdictions when this is over. Fulton County DA, I saw you on MSNBC, I think Friday. You were great. You and Frank Figluzzi were on, but the motion by Trump's lawyers to have the entire case in Fulton County just thrown out, disqualify the DA. And you said 100% this is going to lose. And not, and 100% it was lost yesterday. Unanimous verdict decision, I should say, not verdict, decision of the Supreme Court in Georgia. How ridiculous and outrageous is it that Trump tried to get the entire case just tossed out?
Yeah, it's absurd because he filed something called a petition for a writ of mandamus. That's a legal mouthful, but basically it's an extraordinary writ that is rarely filed and almost never granted because it involves a defendant or a target of an investigation saying, I have a provable and indisputable legal right to have these things happen. And the judge below, it would be Judge, I forget the name of the judge in Georgia at the moment.
McBurney?
Judge
Yeah.
McBurney.
Yeah.
I have an absolute right to have Judge McBurney do these things. And the fact that he didn't means that he violated a clearly established legal duty. And the three things he wanted, Dean, one, throw out, that is tear up and throw in the garbage, the special grand jury's report indicating that lots of people should be indicted. Two, direct District Attorney Fani Willis that she may never introduce one shred of evidence in any case, criminal or civil, against me that was a product of the grand jury investigation. And three, remove Fani Willis from the prosecution of me, so basically nobody can prosecute me. Those are the three things I have a clear, indisputable right to. And I predicted he would be laughed out of court by the Georgia Supreme Court, and he was.
He was. They quit. So look, we're going to get Fani Willis's letter from May, talked about early August, the courthouse, don't do trials, limited employees there because they're concerned. And the forewoman of the investigative grand jury said 10 or 11 people might be indicted. At least that's what they were recommending. Do you think in Georgia, we will see an indictment that's a sprawling case and including not just Trump, but maybe Rudy Giuliani, maybe Lindsey Graham, that's more of a long shot to be honest, but maybe Rudy Giuliani and a few others, and maybe some Republican officials in Georgia?
Yeah, I don't see Lindsey Graham as a long shot because it was Brad Raffensperger who said, he called me, and what he was telling me to do, my interpretation was he was urging me to throw out lawfully cast ballots. When you have somebody as serious as Brad Raffensperger, like or dislike his politics, saying that, that's a danger zone for Lindsey Graham. But maybe not. He's included in the indictment. I think it will be sprawling. I suspect it will be brought under Georgia's state RICO laws. And I suspect you're going to see dozens, plural, of defendants. I've never seen a prosecutor reach out to a court, the judges, and say, can you please hold no trials for this 2-week period in August? Hold no in-person hearings during this 2-week period in August. Dean, prosecutors don't ask judges to clear their dockets. It's not a thing that we do, right? Judges would probably tear our heads off if we tried to do it. That is a sure sign that she's going to be running so many defendants through those courtrooms down in Georgia, in Fulton County, on their arraigning them on their indictments, and they're going to have to have a hearing for each one, setting conditions of release, and it's going to take her 2 weeks to do it. Yeah, a big old Georgia indictment is coming.
And it could, I think it's going to implicate, Trump is the headline, but I think in Georgia, there are Georgia former officials. I think the lieutenant governor, the current one, not the former one, is potentially implicated as well. This could be a huge thing that we're going to all look at in great detail as it goes on. So last thing, say Trump is finally charged. It's 2 years and maybe by August 6th, to say that's 2 years and 7 months. Was that too long, or is it okay now in retrospect if it happens now?
I mean, we have to live with it. I think we can still get a trial conducted through verdict and sentencing before the November 2024 presidential election. I would say well before. But, I think we have to do an autopsy on the investigative failures of the Department of Justice, because Donald Trump could have been arrested on January 7th for any number of criminal offenses that he committed while he was president, or that he committed on January 6th. We had probable cause to arrest Donald Trump on January 7th, 2021. I understand why we didn't do it, but in hindsight, we definitely moved too slowly as an institution, a law enforcement institution that goes for the DOJ and the FBI.
Well, Glenn, thank you so much on this big day. Next big day will be the actual indictment. We hope that happens. And if people want to follow all of your work, what's the best place? Because you're everywhere. You're on Threads, you're on Twitter, you're on YouTube. What do you suggest they go to?
Yeah, I mean, so my YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, is where they can find a legal analysis video posted every day. Ordinarily, it is kind of the marquee legal issue of the day. And I try to break it down in layman's terms, in a layman-friendly way. You can also find me now on Threads and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, all at Glenn Kirschner 2, my name and the number 2. And then if anybody wants to support what we do here, because what we do here is all volunteer, they can go over to patreon.com, something called Patreon, where people can sign up for $1 or $5 or whatever, and actually support our all volunteer efforts, mission, and content. And if you do, I send you all kinds of goodies and give you behind the scene glimpses of what we do in this crazy professional chapter 2 after I retired from the Department of Justice.
Well, Glenn, thank you so much, my friend. It's always great chatting with you. I look forward to chatting with you probably in the next week or two about new developments. Have a great night.
Thanks, Dean.